computing, of course. And in my work, we're using that quantum phenomenology to do actual circuitry as well. There's a few.
Jason?
So I think the very interesting thing about quantum is you kind of tap into this kind of particle wave duality, and you start getting to the area where we're all waves, essentially, and we interfere with each other. And so when things come close to each other, all of our atoms are actually intertwined. They're communicating by waves and ripples throughout the room. And you get there, and this really cool concept, almost a spiritual concept, that we are all connected at the quantum level. And if you think about these waves, you think about the ways that we can use quantum. And we can use quantum either by using the fact that a single atom will be affected by everything around it, and we can use that to sense things, or by isolating it from everything else and just taking the effects and those special quantum attributes and measuring them and manipulating them to get different effects. So sensing, quantum computing, quantum encryption are either sensing the world around you at the atomic and subatomic level, or isolating it and attempting to measure and perturb an isolated atom or photon or subatomic particle.
So I have a slightly different perspective. I work in the cybersecurity cryptographic field, and so for me the priority initially is to understand the threat that a large enough quantum machine will give to the way we protect data today. So just from a priority perspective, we need to be protecting systems and data for the next decade or so, and means we need to be doing something today. I guess the second part of my answer would be in terms of what you can use a quantum computer for in terms of improving cybersecurity. So some of the optimization problems, things like this. So it's really kind of a duality. But the primary, the priority for me right now is really protecting against people doing the wrong things. It's going to be used for a lot of cool things, but it's really just making sure we're protected going forward.
Gina, do you suppose we could pull up those few slides I sent?
Okay. If you can cue the slides for Bo, slide deck A.
So, all right. Looks like I had a typo on the title, but let's, if we could go, if we could go to the next one, would be great. So again, this I think is just my little attempt to collect things that we've used as we've talked about, done an introduction to things quantum, and this is, I think, gets kind of right at the first point that you made, and the reality when people say quantum today, most people think of computing, but I think there will be many, many, many more applications that are sort of like the hidden part of an iceberg, and we'll hit on some of those. So the next slide is just a title slide from General Cooley, whom some of you would know, who runs the Air Force Weapons Laboratories. And this was from a talk he gave going on a year ago, and the next slide is the actual meat of it. And it shows the U.S. Air Force's view of where it might apply quantum over the next 10 to 20 years. And I think you would see, again, very similar to the submerged parts of the ice cube, of the iceberg. And you would see quantum timing, sensing, quantum computing, quantum networking, and then underlying technologies. And things quantum being used throughout the Air Force mission. So the military applications, I think, are broad and will be driving parts of the quantum race. But the next slide is one that I believe also will help drive where things quantum are going. And what I did here was just, this is part of a larger presentation, but when you think about autonomous vehicles, people think about autonomous vehicles getting lots of inputs in and figuring out where the vehicle is and trying to determine what's out there in front of it and should it turn left, go right, go straight, and relying on GPS satellites amongst other things. And the reality is that GPS satellites are easily spoofed. They're not secure. And so we believe that there are ways to be able to create quantum devices. I call it just quantum positioning system, a QPS for short, that will be spoof-proof, doesn't rely on any satellites, will be modular, portable, sort of self-contained, and will give you very accurate timing and positioning navigation systems in your own vehicle. So that's what the QPS represents. And then secondly, I think we'll find that there are another class of quantum devices that are sort of like computers, but maybe more like quantum analog computers that can be used in quantum, what I'm calling here broadly quantum signal processing. Won't go any further than that today, but I think the idea is take analog signals, go through an A to Q converter, create a model, a quantum model of sort of the world that you're viewing, and you need to come up with very quickly in real time, make decisions, and the outputs from that are simple, just a handful of things to do: go left, go straight, go right, slow down, go faster, stop, something like that. So I think that we'll find classes of devices that we haven't even imagined yet that will perhaps be side by side with these others. If we went quickly to the next slide, you would see that just for GPS, for example, when you think of GPS, we think of our cell phones. But GPS is used everywhere, in some cases for timing of financial networks, of all of the big networks we use, whether they be Amazon or Google or others, and just across so many applications. And the next slide gives you just some places to look, and you can, by the way, have copies of all these slides. But there was a study done by a group led by the University of Texas, as shown on the left side of this chart, using unclassified information that showed that over about a 2-year period, there were about 10,000 instances of Russian spoofing of GPS satellites. That included commercial ships that showed up, instead of being out in the ocean, they were showing up, their GPS was showing them as being on land and that sort of thing. So easily spoofed, and both on the military side as well as on the civilian side. So my point, a long way of saying that, this idea of having spoof-proof GPSs applies both to commercial as well as military applications. And the next one is just shows the breadth of some of the applications that you could use a quantum positioning system in. Again, spoof-proof, modular, more accurate timing than you get with today's atomic clocks that the nation and the world uses, and better positioning and navigation information. The next one is, the next slide is just some ideas about how this, the way to think about this quantum signal processing, I think, is real-time quantum devices that are probably designed for specific applications to operate very quickly to try to analyze the situation that you're facing and make decisions, and a handful of relatively simple outputs on the other side. So the next slide is really how different technologies might be able to be used, and we think that the different technology modalities will be better for different types of applications, I guess, is the simple way to say that. And then the next slide is one that says, in fact, there is some of these quantum technologies aren't so far away. You may not know it, but on the International Space Station today is a device that JPL built using the heart of it is a product from ColdQuanta. But it is creating quantum matter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're part of this NASA program, you can create quantum matter on the space station in a microgravity environment today, which means that these quantum devices are rugged enough to be able to be launched by a rocket, installed by quantum mechanics, who we would otherwise call astronauts, and be able to operate remotely 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So with that, we'll just end with, there's one last one here, and I think there is one last one. And I've been in high-performance computing and graphics, and I'm now in my second quantum startup company. So I've been doing this stuff a long time, and we're all beneficiaries of the invention of the transistor and using electrons, and I call that kind of the first wave of the information age, electronics, and it really was the digital wave. And then the second wave came about a little after that when we started to be able to harness photons, and that was the start of the communication wave. And so photons and fiber optics and all the things that we use today, who would have imagined 30 years ago that you could have your eyes operated on with a laser, or that you could listen to this little disc of music or watch one that a laser is built into? Who would have ever imagined that? And my guess, and this is purely a guess, is that we're at the start of kind of the third wave of the information age, and this one's going to be around things quantum. And in our case, we're looking at using cold atoms or neutral atoms to be able to do it. Quantum atomics is kind of the word we've coined. But I think you all are going to live in an age which is going to be digital, based on electrons, electronics, photonics, and then quantum something. And they've built on each other. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity here coming for both application of things quantum, but also building huge, strong businesses around it. And I've taken all of my time, and I won't say anything to the rest of the panel.
Really, this is one of those odd questions, because as everyone's kind of gotten to at this point, it seems at the moment that everyone sort of says quantum about everything. There's a bit from Ant-Man where someone said, "Did you just say quantum in front of everything?" And it's the way it feels. You'll just sort of staple a Q on everything, and it's a bit like the @ sign in the early 90s. Just because you call it pets at home doesn't mean it's brilliant and sellable and internet ready. But in truth, there are, as Bo said, a number of really fascinating technologies which are being unlocked by this exploration of matter at a very small scale. It is comparable, I feel like, to a bit like transistors. And to bring another superhero analogy, if you ever read any of the early Iron Man comic books, Tony Stark cannot stop talking about his tiny transistors. My tiny transistors give me power and help me fly and shoot laser beams out of my hands. Well, yes, transistors did all those things. But to say you're a transistor person, it covers an awful lot of stuff. So I am narrowed down. I did 25 years in the Air Force. I now do work for a startup called QCware. We're focusing on the computational part of it, which is only a part of it. Going back to the kindergarten thing, I actually do have a little literal hand-waving routine where I pretend to pluck a coin out of the air and say, all right, this is a coin. It's like a bit, heads, tails. I will give you this coin if, which incidentally is a dramatic way to gain the attention of a kindergartner or a grad student or a policymaker, honestly, and talk about the difference between that and what regular logic is, yes and no, and what a superposition of yes and no states would be and how that extends to things. And for me, I love it because it's a new way to think. I grew up programming the Apple II, right? And my father said, son, you're looking for a place to go to college. I know you think this programming stuff is interesting, but there's no futures in computers. It's 1988. You should go into helicopters. And that's how I flew 30-year-old helicopters over North Dakota while the internet revolution happened. And I swore that wasn't going to happen again. And this represents a new way of thinking, and it expands my mind in the same way that learning another computer language expands my mind. So I'm very fascinated in the computational side of things and how that what problems it's applicable to, and how it isn't applicable, and how we can use it in many other ways. So yeah, I'm interested in the computer side.
Maybe go ahead, show my presentation. I'm going to show just a few slides here.
If you can include slide deck Delta D.
So, yeah. Nope, wrong one.
So, oh, sorry. Bravo.
So I'm Scott Holmes. I work at DARPA, but I'm also on something called the IRDS, International Roadmap for Devices and Systems. Some of you knew about the technology roadmap for semiconductors. They were the ones who would say, okay, the next node is going to be 22 nanometer, gate lengths, et cetera, for the fabrication. That's stopped. That's been replaced. And this new group has a group on quantum electronics and quantum information processing, and I'm the lead for that. And so what we're doing is looking for what's the state of the technology, what does the community need going in the future, and trying to get the roadmap toward that. Let's go next one. all I'll say is that the scope is including superconductor electronics, cryogenic semiconductors, and this quantum information processing area. And there is a link, there is a report from 2018 that's available. So let's go to the next one. One thing that I wanted to point out to the group is that one of the things that we look at is a lot of these technologies, not all of them, but many of them require low temperatures. And this is something that maybe a lot of people don't understand, is that a refrigerator requires, of course, power to run. The colder the thing is that you're putting inside the refrigerator, the colder you're keeping it, the more power is required. And here, if you look, if you're up at around liquid nitrogen temperatures, close to 100 kelvins, you're down in the tens of watts per watt. So every watt that you extract, you need tens of watts to run the refrigerator. If you go down to the area where millikelvin, say 20 millikelvin range, where a lot of the quantum phenomena really become dominant, some of these systems need to be cooled to very low temperatures, millikelvins, then you're in the range where you're about 1 billion watts for every watt that you dissipate at that temperature. That's a pretty extreme penalty. It's challenging. I'm telling you about challenges. So as people are starting to think about scaling these things up, right now we need more efficient refrigerators is one of the things that we need if we're going to go that way, or we need some other way. Another thing that I'll point out is that quantum computing, which is of interest to me, and any quantum phenomenon, we can't do everything just with quantum computers. Quantum needs to work with digital and analog computation as well. So they need to be together. And if you have the quantum computing part at 20 millikelvins, if you put any classical digital processes right close, it's going to dissipate a lot of power. We need ways to do computation close, but not too close. And so I also have an interest in superconductor computing, and the concept is that we would operate it somewhere in the in-between area. But I think that's enough. I don't know if there's any. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide, we benchmark and look at various different technologies and how they're coming. Next slide. Quantum information process. This just gives you an idea of what's in the 2018 report, and we look at sensing, quantum communication, quantum computing. We're at this stage right now. We're more just surveying what's going on, and we're monitoring what's going on. And there's a few areas where we're starting to identify things that are road mappable that we can, as a community, say we need to work towards. Right now, we don't know what we know. I mean, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know the best qubit. We don't know the best way to, we don't really know how to build the most effective quantum computer. So we've got a long way to go. There's a lot to know.
So Anna, back at you. So in the upcoming NDAA 2020, Section 243, it says that the Air Force will be establishing the Quantum Information Science Innovation Center. Two-part question. What role do you think the government will play in that, right? And where do you think the best location is for that?
So I hope that and expect my government to play the role of leading, both financially and in terms of setting policy and goals, vision. I think that is the obligation of the government personally. That is how we had a lot of the breakthroughs that we've had, that we live with today. And so I'm really hoping and expecting that will happen. In terms of where it's located, we were talking beforehand about regional places where there's sort of a community that sprouts up or exists already that has interest in things like that. And so from my perspective, anywhere where you have sort of critical mass of scientists and interested parties would be great. I'm sure there's several places that we could do that throughout the U.S. I think the most important part, though, is that we all sort of feel ownership within it, so that it doesn't sort of feel like it's only for one side or one service, but that everyone across the whole DoD kind of feels a part of it.
Jason, that same question, as a Navy veteran, part of industry now, how do you feel that where that center will be located, and what role will industry play?
So I agree that the most important thing is to have it co-located with sources of talent and sources of knowledge. From the commercial side, however, we're motivated by the profit motive. If our companies don't create money for our investors, we can't continue on the research and development of new products. And so the products that industry is currently going after are those that we think will solve the pain points for our users in the nearest term. However, we understand that there are some long-term big bets, some moonshots that we need to take. And when you're a small company, you see a lot of these innovations coming out in large companies. You know, you see the Googles, you see the IBMs, you see the D-Waves that are creating these big, complex systems. However, the innovation that we need to create may be in something that we're not going to get that early term investment on, or it may come from somebody who's not in one of those large companies. And so what we need from the federal government is we need that thought leadership, we need the investment, and we need really that public-private partnership in order to bridge that funding gap to get to the big wins that can be monetized and create value for a company and create value for the nation. And on top of that, the biggest thing we need is a public-private partnership to encourage the development of talent within the United States ecosystem and within our international partners, because it's not about how much quantum we can create, it's how many people involved in the quantum industry we can create.
So, Michael, I have a question in regards, there is one other transaction, IBM-Q, we have, the Air Force apparently has a license for $7 million, but we don't have other transactions in this area, nor is it really written in the FAR, so I don't understand where we're not taking advantage in this area. Can you tell us more about your other transaction for IBM-Q license?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it kind of ties back to the location. So we have what we call a Q network around the world with so-called Q hubs. And it really depends a bit on which part of the quantum spectrum you want to innovate in. Is it more on the hardware and the technology side? Is it more about the algorithm side, essentially? And what I observe in other parts of the world is actually a focus on the algorithm side. This is the interesting side. I mean, yeah, this is where, for example, the promise of discovering new materials, the promise of being able to do things faster than other people, it's a little bit where the race is, essentially. And so I guess to answer your question, it's really comes down to where you want to focus, and I think the interest really is on the algorithm side. The interesting thing about the algorithm side is to program a quantum computer is not like programming a classical computer. You have to completely rethink, reframe problems and move them into a quantum domain. And that's where all the interest is. It's such a rich and dynamic area where there's a whole lot of scope, location independent for really interesting discoveries and differentiation.
And we have wasted a lot of panel time writing memos saying that yes, China is pumping a lot of R&D money. Why don't we just fund and reach the quantum moonshoot and aim to win? Why don't we go after those other transactions in this area? Mm-hmm.
So why don't we fund the quantum moon?
Why don't we go after the other transactions in this area to go after the quantum moonshoot to aim to win?
I think we should. I'm all in. Yes. So yeah, I think other transactions are actually a wonderful vehicle for creating the kind of industrial government partnership, bringing in private money. I know that's something that's on my strategic list of things to do in my specific area. they're a beautiful thing that we're just sort of learning how to do, and we can write them as we need them within the government. So I think it's a great opportunity to do the moon shoot or some mini moon shoots, you know, some Mount Everest shoots, at several of them, right? And then you could ultimately kind of have them interconnected. So that's what I'm hoping for and actually hoping to take action on soon.
Scott, how do you think DARPA can help us with that?
I can't say anything about that, I don't think. Sorry. Let's see, there are people within DARPA who are, Tatiana Kirchik, for instance, has a program on using near noisy intermediate scale quantum computing. So it's working on it. So.
Bo, this question is for you. You're most familiar with what's going on at NASA Ames. Last Friday, Google announced quantum supremacy, right? And basically they said, you know, unofficially, because the paper is not released yet, what took a conventional computer 10,000 years now takes a quantum computer 3 minutes and 20 seconds. What's the impact overnight?
Yeah, so that's a huge achievement. Just to be able to demonstrate, to back up a little bit. So this isn't officially announced yet. There was a little slip up and a draft of the paper appeared on the NASA website. Everybody's seen it, I'm sure, but it isn't peer reviewed and it's not published yet. So what people have seen is something that's really should be thought of as a draft and is preliminary, and it may go through some revisions. Having said that, my guess is that the heart of the paper will survive and will be an actual result, and it's being able to use the Google 50-ish qubit machine to be able to demonstrate on sort of not a real problem, but on a problem that's aimed at demonstrating randomness using quantum techniques, that in fact a quantum computer for the first time is bazillions of times faster than a traditional computer. And so it's really significant in that aspect. But I think in the reality of building businesses and more importantly applications of quantum computing, people are interested in real world applications or snippets of real world applications, because I do think there will be this hybrid mode that we operate in. And so in the end, real people using quantum computers are going to note this. It's significant. It gives us all hope. But in the end, this was true in high performance computing, true in computer graphics, and people who are using computers always say, can you run my application or some part of it? How fast and what does it cost? And it starts with, can you run my application or some part of it? And my guess is that the real breakthroughs in applied quantum computing are going to come not so much from quantum supremacy, but from what I would characterize as a whole bunch of smaller wins of quantum advantage on specific applications, where there may well be, you know, some of them may be in numerical things, others will be in optimization problems, machine learning, and a whole collection of things. But I think that though this achievement is huge and it's a really great thing, there won't be, when the real applications or snippets of applications start running on quantum computers and there's demonstrated quantum advantage, that I think is when the ball really gets rolling on quantum computing.
And back to you, a question about, you're focused on superconducting, right? I mean, we kind of gave up the semiconducting market to our adversaries. What can we do to make a flourishing U.S. superconducting chip market, and how can we create trusted foundries in the U.S.?
Just enunciated my dream really clearly. I think a couple things. One thing is, I believe, and Scott, don't throw anything at me, but I believe we really need to get ahead of it. So we've been kind of, so far in the last, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years, pretty much leading or at least staying even in the superconductivity that is well known. But I think we need to make a moonshot, if you will, and kind of reach forward to high temperature superconductivity and do something about that. I think that that's achievable because we've had 30 years of nanotechnology and fabrication technology, so it's not the same. I think we have a chance. And I think I know our adversaries are not choosing that path. So that's something I think we should do that will create an industry here that our adversaries are not already on top of. And it's relatively inexpensive, too. What was the other part of your question?
How should we create trusted foundries in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I think we all sort of, everyone's familiar with the debacle of, at least from my perspective, of having what was trusted become not so trusted. So, yeah, we need to take that seriously, especially if we're going to develop new materials, foundries, and processes and all that. We need to start with that in mind. And my approach is that we should dualize ourselves in that way. So we have plenty of places where we can create trusted or even secret foundries, and that's a good idea to preserve our advantage in an important way. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that the sort of biggest war, in my opinion, that's going on is economic. So we don't want to forget ourselves in that and make sure that we give ourselves a strong foothold as we go forward, whether it's for superconductivity or atoms or whatever new technology that we're moving forward in.
I have plenty more questions, but in limitation of time, I have one last question. What can this community here do for you guys? You know, we don't want to create another like symptom of fake agile or fake quantum. What can this community do to help you?
I guess I'll take the first shot at this. The biggest barrier to adoption of quantum is knowledge of what quantum is. And I blame the science fiction authors, and I blame all of you for reading science fiction books. And the reason is, in science fiction, artificial intelligence and robotics is the sum of all problems in what's going on. You are always fighting against artificial intelligence because it's fighting to replace humanity. And if you look into it, what is your solution to everything? Your solution to everything is quantum. You have a quantum suit. You take a quantum leap. You quantum shift through a force field. You create a quantum force field. There are a million different ways that you can solve things through quantum. However, they never talk to you about a physicist who is sitting there just trying to level a table so that the laser will line up with a mirror in order to capture a group of 300 atoms and supercool them. They'll never talk about getting that bill for the electricity to cool something that is smaller than the tip of the head of a pin, and that, not even that, but the cluster of atoms on the tip of that pen. So they'll never talk about creating a manufacturing process that's completely in ultra-high vacuum and not being able to touch your system. All these things are very, very difficult. And we need you as a community to understand not the details of it, but understand that quantum, just like artificial intelligence, is difficult. And quantum, just like artificial intelligence, has the same problems. It has the problem of needing to get funding. It has the problem of people who misunderstand it or want to take advantage of the hype with quantum and going out and taking resources from people who are doing legitimate quantum. And most importantly, it has the problem of creating a workforce that is steeped in this. And double down, it's not as sexy as artificial intelligence. Physicists are great to party with, but we make horrible panel members. And so what I encourage you to do is to look at quantum as a career field and not just being a physicist, because physicists also make horrible engineers. They make horrible computer scientists. There's a lot of things that physicists don't do well. I'm just starting to realize there's a talk up here. Physicists are horrible marketers. We don't, have you seen some of these charts we put up here? We're great at marketing to each other, but man, let's not put that on Trustella as a product, okay? We need you to be interested in quantum. We need you to become part of the workforce internationally that works on these problems for the national security of the United States and our partners.
later, I have stuff to say to you, but don't be slamming all the physicists in my presence. But so I would like to say what we would like you to do is expect us, if we can't answer your question the first time, to come back with another answer that speaks to you. Because the hardest part, in my experience, about getting a new technology adopted is, like you said, for people to understand it. And that falls on us that are in the field, all of us that are working in that field closely. That's our responsibility. And so I would ask you, if you're not in that field, to hold all of us accountable to that. Don't let us just walk away and think, oh, I didn't understand what that was. It's our responsibility to explain it in that way. So that's what I hope you will do.
So I'm not a physicist, so I don't feel in any way... listen, so, I mean, when I talk about quantum computing now, so this technology is made available by the cloud. It's available to everybody, and my observation is that, for example, our cloud systems, they are used by hundreds of thousands of people, and millions of experiments have run. I don't know how many people have been involved in running those experiments here, but if there haven't been so many, it's likely to be awareness, education. Actually, the technology is readily available. It's really, and there's a very low barrier to entry in actually using that technology. And so I would really urge everybody here, I mean, just go and look and play. I mean, to be quite fair, it's not just our systems. There's a number of systems out there. And it's really attracted, this is what I find really surprising, the interest of people, the number of people, the hundreds of thousands of people using this, it's sparked some interest. I mean, it's in physics and programming and looking at things in a different way. So really awareness and just go and play.
I guess if I were to say one thing, it would be inquisitive. Don't be afraid. It's not going to hurt you. It's going to be, and it's going to have defense applications and civilian applications, but be inquisitive. We're sort of like where the world must have been in 1950-ish or something like that, after, you know, some weird physicists at Bell Labs invented this thing called a transistor. Well, what in the world could you do with it? Well, some people said, well, you know, gee, maybe we can create instruments from it. I think that was HP. Another company said maybe we can create computers. And their big boss, by the way, a few years before had said he thought maybe there were only 5 computers that the world could ever use, and look at where that went. And another company said, you know, maybe we could create a calculator from this little transistor thing. And the same thing when lasers came along in the 60s and 70s. I mean, this was one kind of weird physicsy, science-looking thing, but some people said, well, you know, we can use it maybe for communications, we can create ways to do music, we can even fix your eyes if you don't see very well. I mean, who would have thought of that? So inquisitive people thought of that, and that's exactly where we are. And the inquisitive people are people in companies, they're people in governments, they're people who want to use this. So I would say be inquisitive and support inquisitive people in looking at these new technologies.
I think I should add to that, if you cannot be inquisitive, at least be very patient. This is a non-trivial thing, and I don't mean it just to be comic, but this is what in the multiplayer online battle arena they call a long carry, or over the valley of death in the innovation community. This could be alarmingly powerful. One of the lovely shock tactics that people throw around is Shor's algorithm for factoring 2048-bit RSA. And one estimate I saw at one point was it takes 16 quadrillion years for a classical computer, but 8 hours for a proper quantum computer. But it would also take 20 million qubits, which makes our 53-bit qubit computers here, which are amazing, look swell. And it takes a long time for these technologies to scale. They will. They will deliver. I truly believe that. But if we get wrapped up in hype, it will be easy to be disappointed when there is so much wonderful exploration to do right now. So I would ask for patience, and I would ask for all of the agencies who are attempting to change innovation culture in the government, please keep fighting. I came in wanting to change the world, as everyone does. I got tremendously excited in 2001 with things like the Agile Manifesto. No one would listen. I tried just building things, and my heart for disruption is gone. I merely want to build things cool enough that people use them. And you have a long road ahead. When we've shipped this around to a couple of agencies, I have great respect for the amazing human beings in our military because I was one, and I know that they are human beings, and they are tasked, overtasked constantly. And so when we approached some of them, they said, Vic, we need butts in seats right now. We can't look at speculative stuff. Maybe this could optimize global logistics. I can't even get software that helps me manage my logistics. We approached another, and the response was kind of fascinating, a bit more like, this gift horse is back again. Would someone look it in the mouth until it goes away so we can get back to work? We need headroom. We need headroom to explore, headroom to expand, and really probe things while getting the mission done. That's not easy, and I don't know how to get that. And I think we also need a culture that celebrates exploration in ways that it no longer does. The people who are going to take us to the next level in quantum and any of our other engineering things have already been born. They're already going through school. They've already seen intellectuals mocked by people in high places. They have seen people ignore threats by scientists for climate change and seen sea levels rise. And they have seen the world's smartest people being celebrated for getting people to click on different icons and buy things more effectively. Will they turn to something as abstract and complex as quantum engineering without guidance and without role models? I wish I could be more optimistic. I am legitimately scared about this. I have a 1-year-old. I would like there to be a world for her to grow up in. And it is not trivial to fire that. There's a wonderful quote that's attributed to, you've seen it in any leadership thing probably, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry about if you want people to build ships, do not gather men and women and gather wood and give out orders, but teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I could teach anyone in here to program a quantum computer and appreciate abstract math, but I could not make you love it, no matter how much I paid. And until we as a culture celebrate that more, I think we will be fighting an uphill battle against this. So what the government can do, well, there's probably a lot in there. But what we can do is be inquisitive, be patient, and build things and just see what they break. It's really cool. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with the last two about being curious and being inquisitive. The thing that I see that we need as a community to do also is to share. And in the early stages of learning, and that's what we're doing, is we're learning. It's more effective if we're curious and we're inquisitive and we learn individually, but then we share. And that will allow us all to grow and learn much more quickly. And so what I do as part of this IRDS, this road mapping group, is to work with different communities, this community, and to help people and organizations learn when to share and when to compete. And we need a balance of both of them. And but if we break off too quickly and just compete and don't share information, we're gonna stunt everyone. The entire organization, the entire community is going to be stunted. We're going to be slowed down. So we need to balance that and share.
So we're out of time. I would love to take questions, but Michael gave me the but in closing, other transactions, quantum moonshoot, let's aim high. This is not trivial at all. So thank you for being part of the panel.